There are all sorts of strange legends associated with New Jersey. The most well-known is probably the Jersey Devil, but there are plenty of other stories the Garden State has to offer. Here are just two of the many haunted places in New Jersey. Two places that are rumored to be haunted by the ghosts of murderers. Just off Mountain Road in Bernards Township, in the middle of an open field, sits a tree. Trees aren't exactly an uncommon sight, but this particular one has a storied legendary history that's led it to be called the creepiest place to visit in the state. Local legends tell all sorts of dark stories about the so-called Devil's Tree. There are rumors that a local chapter of the Ku Klux Klan used it for lynchings and cross burnings years ago. Other stories tell of a farmer who killed his entire family, then hanged himself on the tree. These deaths are said to give the tree dark energy and a curse that causes all sorts of horrible things to happen to those who dare to mess with it. Of course, there's no evidence that any of these murders or the farmer's suicide ever happened, but that doesn't seem to stop the stories, and there are quite a few of them. As the legends go, anyone who tries to cut down the tree is cursed. Many people have attempted it over the years, as evidenced by the many marks on its trunk, but nobody has yet succeeded. Those who try are said to meet an untimely end. Other stories tell of a ghost truck that patrols the area. It's said to be driven by a sentinel from hell who guards the tree and chases anyone who tries to mess with it. One source says this story was simply an exaggeration of the truth, and a normal human family drove out to the tree and chased people away. Another source says the story was made up entirely by local boys who wanted to hang out and drink at the tree by themselves. There are a few typical ghost stories associated with the Devil's Tree. Apparitions of people hanging from the branches have been reported, as well as strange noises coming from the tree, mostly the sounds of people screaming or trying to make their way out from the inside. But most of the accounts center on strange things that have happened to people after visiting the tree. One account tells of a man who peed on the tree, then hit a deer while driving home. Another tells of someone getting into another minor car crash after bad-mouthing the tree. In another, a group of friends visited the tree and saw a noose hanging from one of the branches. When they tried to get it off, they heard a strange noise from inside the tree, and a burst of energy sent them all flying. Others have claimed they got a strange black substance on their hands, or even that their hands started bleeding for no apparent reason, just for getting close to the tree. Those who take a piece of bark as a souvenir have claimed to wake up to see an old man standing at the foot of their bed. According to the Big Book of New Jersey Ghost Stories, the property owners wrapped chain link fence around the tree in 2009, which is visible in several photos of the tree. To me, this seems like a pretty clear sign that they're tired of people messing with it. The tree also sits on private property, so maybe this is one you should just listen to the stories about and not try to visit. The Union Hotel was built in 1878 on the site of a former stagecoach shop in Flemington, about 50 miles east of Newark. By all accounts, the hotel appears to be a well-known and loved landmark, and a few decades after its opening, it would play a part in a major historical event. On March 1st, 1932, 20-month-old Charles Lindbergh Jr. was kidnapped from his home in Hopewell, New Jersey. His body was found about a month and a half later, just a few miles from his home. Charles's father, Charles Lindbergh Sr., had made headlines a few years earlier for making the first solo, non-stop transatlantic flight. The murder of Charles Jr. was also big news. Bruno Hauptmann was soon arrested for the crime. His trial began in early 1935, It was held at the Hunterdon County Courthouse, just across the street from the Union Hotel. During the month-long trial, jurors were sequestered in the hotel's upper floors when court wasn't in session. The hotel also became a gathering place for reporters and other people who wanted to discuss the trial, sort of like a modern-day Twitter, though obviously on a much smaller scale. On February 13th, 1935, Bruno Hauptmann was found guilty of kidnapping and murder. He was executed the following year. Over the years, several stories of alleged hauntings have sprung up at the hotel. Most of these are from employees and purported to have happened in times or places where guests weren't allowed. Many of these stories involve children. There are several accounts of children being heard playing when there were no guests at the hotel. Ghost children have been spotted, and there are even stories of a ghost girl who sits on the steps and tries to trip people. A waitress once claimed to hear a disembodied voice singing a lullaby. In another account, a staff member saw a little girl running around the dining room hours after it had closed. When his coworkers told him she was a ghost, he was astounded because, in his words, she looked so real. And there were plenty of other non-child related stories. In one, a manager felt something press against her chest early in the morning. When she asked whatever it was to leave, the pressure stopped. Perhaps the most well-known story involves an employee who locked the hotel's front doors, only to have them fly right back open. When he went to close them again, he saw a pair of shoes walking up the stairs on their own. Other reported hauntings include voices from an empty dining room and bar stools spinning on their own, more doors slamming on their own, and feelings of an unknown or unseen presence, as if someone is watching you when you're alone. Other reports suggest Bruno Hauptmann himself haunts the hotel, though it's not clear if he ever even entered it. And really, it's unclear just why there are so many reported ghost stories at the Union Hotel. None of these stories appear to have any sort of real-world occurrences attached to them. There are no reports of casualties at the hotel, at least none that are readily available online. If there were, surely they would be talked about along with the stories, wouldn't they? Did being associated with a trial of a child murderer give the hotel some sort of dark energy? Did guests love their stays there so much that they wanted to come back in the afterlife? Or are the stories simply the result of the overactive imaginations of employees who are alone in dark, quiet areas for too long? As always, I will let you decide for yourself what you believe. The hotel was closed to guests in the late 1970s. It changed hands numerous times over the years before being converted into a restaurant that closed in 2008. For the next decade or so, the hotel fell into disrepair. As of June 2022, renovations are currently underway to convert the hotel and surrounding areas into 20,000 square feet of retail and restaurant space. Whether the paranormal rumors will continue in this new phase of the hotel's life remains yet to be seen.
Have you ever been to Crybaby Bridge? If you live in or have ever been to the US, there's a pretty good chance you've at least been near one. Dozens of supposedly haunted bridges have been given this name, and the legends behind them often involve child death, usually at the hands of the child's own mother. So, nice pleasant stuff. Here are 6 Crybaby bridges across the United States. Number 1, Utah. About 70 miles north of Salt Lake City lies Bear River City. The city's aptly named Bear River Bridge was built in 1889, then closed and bypassed by a different bridge in 1999. According to legend, a mother thought her 2 children were possessed by the devil, so she drove them to the bridge, where she proceeded to purposefully drive off the side and into the river below, killing everyone in the car. They say if you park on the bridge with your windows rolled down and honk 3 times, you can hear a child's voice say, "Don't do it, mother." Where these stories come from isn't entirely clear. One blog post I found, which will be linked below, mentions the story of Ellis Anderson, a 4-year-old who was accidentally struck and killed on the bridge by a mail carrier. I couldn't find anything online backing up this story, but the original poster said they found it in a newspaper, so maybe I just didn't dig deep enough. Either way, if any part of this legend is true, I'd advise you to maybe not park on the bridge if you can avoid it. Number 2. Liberty Township, Ohio. Our next bridge is on Maud Hughes Road in Liberty Township, about 25 miles north of Cincinnati. The bridge runs over a railroad and has been around since at least the 1870s. At some point, the bridge was torn down and replaced, but the old bridge accrued more than its fair share of dark stories and urban legends. At least 36 deaths and gruesome accidents have supposedly taken place in the area. According to the most famous legend, a couple was driving across the bridge when their car broke down. The man left his girlfriend in the car while he went to get help. When he got back, his girlfriend was hanging by her neck from the bridge, presumably already dead. No versions of the legend I could find said anything about whether he actually found help. There have been rumors of other accidents in the area, though I'm not sure any of them can be confirmed. Most of them involve train accidents killing railroad workers or passengers, but one is about a bus driver who loses control and kills everyone on board. Another legend involves a mother throwing her newborn baby from the bridge, which is going to be a common theme in these stories. There's another story about a girl who jumped out of the car after an argument with her boyfriend, but got too close to the edge and fell to her death. There have also been stories of a shooting at the bridge in the late 1980s. Unsurprisingly, the bridge's morbid, alleged history has paved the way for plenty of paranormal activity. Sightings of mists, apparitions, orbs, hooded figures, and phantom trains and engineers have all been reported. According to legend, if you stop on the bridge and flash your headlights 3 times, you'll see some sort of unspecified paranormal activity. No idea what said activity consists of, but since the bridge is apparently private property now, investigate at your own risk. Number 3. Maryland. Our next bridge is at the end of multiple narrow, winding gravel roads in Westminster, Maryland. As if that wasn't creepy enough, there's also a cemetery along the final road. This bridge doesn't have quite as many legends associated with it, but the ones it does have are pretty terrifying. The first one involves a young girl who got pregnant, presumably out of wedlock in a time where this was more frowned upon, and was afraid to tell her parents. She had the baby, but once it was born, she threw it off the side of the bridge. Legend says you can hear her dead baby crying. In another similar story, a slave owner had a relationship with one of his slaves who got pregnant. Once the baby was born, the slave owner threw it off the bridge. There are also legends of KKK members throwing black babies off the bridge. Yeah, I told you these stories were terrifying. Multiple witnesses have reported seeing ghost children on the bridge. One commenter on a blog post I found, which will be linked below, said they parked on the bridge at night and swears they heard a voice saying, "Wanna come play?" Yeah, as sweet as that invite is, I think I'd have to pass. Number 4. Salem, Ohio. Salem's Crybaby Bridge is located just off Egypt Road and is now closed to traffic. Stories of satanic cults have reportedly plagued the bridge since its early days. And there's even a story about a woman who was burned alive in a cage on the bridge in a satanic ritual in the 1970s. There are also stories of a string of teenage suicides in the area around the same time. And a very real case from 2010, a woman's burned body was found in a van near the bridge. As far as I can tell, this murder remains unsolved. But the bridge's most popular legend dates back to the 1930s. It involves a couple who was arguing on the bridge and didn't realize their young child had wandered off. The child fell off the bridge and drowned in the creek. In some versions, the mother realizes what happened and jumps in the creek to save her child, but ends up drowning herself. When the father comes looking for them later, he finds the bodies, panics, and runs off into the woods, never to be seen again. Since then, people have reported all sorts of paranormal activity. Witnesses have claimed to see a fog or blue mist and hear a baby crying during the day. A dark figure has been seen off the road, thought to be the father who ran off into the woods. There have also been sightings of orbs, although I'm always skeptical with orbs, since they could easily be the camera malfunctioning or something going wrong with the lighting. Number 5. Helltown, Ohio. So let's start with the obvious here. Helltown is a pretty sinister name. The area known as Helltown, Ohio is actually part of Boston Township, and was founded in 1806 but closed and abandoned in 1974. Helltown is chock full of legends and ghost stories, including its very own Crybaby Bridge. The legend behind this haunting is pretty vague, but it also resembles a lot of other similar ones. The woman in white who haunts the bridge is said to have thrown her baby off the side. Yeah, I told you this was going to be a common theme. But for all the story's vagueness, the ritual to summon this woman is oddly specific. Park your car on the bridge, turn it off, lock the doors, but leave the keys in the ignition, and walk away. If you come back an unspecified amount of time later, the motor will be running and the car will be covered in tiny handprints. I guess you're supposed to run off and get a burger or something while ghosts break into your car. At some point, the bridge passed over the Cuyahoga River. So sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. But all the recent photos I've seen of the area are completely dry. Some people also believe that the prints on your car are actually the prints of turkeys and raccoons in the area. Personally, I'm not convinced that raccoon paws and human handprints look anything alike, but the idea of a ghost turning on your car is also kind of a stretch. So who knows? Number 6, Crystal Springs, Ohio. Of the 6 bridges on this list, 4 of them are in Ohio. I swear I didn't do this on purpose. There are just a lot of crybaby bridges in Ohio. In fact, in my research, I came across nearly a dozen of them. Seriously, what are you people doing up there in Ohio? Anyway, this legend is probably the darkest one on this list. As the story goes, a man brought his wife and newborn baby to the bridge one day. Once there, he proceeded to hang the wife from the top of the bridge, killing her. Once this was done, he took the baby under the bridge and drowned it in the river. Then he hanged himself under the bridge. This all supposedly happened before 1913, when the original bridge was destroyed in a flood. A new temporary bridge was built and later replaced by a permanent one. The area around the bridge became a park in 1996, and cars can no longer drive over it. But despite all of this, witnesses report seeing a woman's body hanging from the bridge and hearing a baby crying.
So, picture this. You're out alone at night. Maybe you're staying at a hotel, driving down the road, or attending an event and wandered away from the crowd. You see a woman dressed in white and decide, for whatever reason, to approach her. But at some point in your interaction, maybe even before it starts, she disappears right before your eyes. You later discover the truth about this woman. Maybe the white outfit is her wedding dress and she was just left at the altar. Maybe she couldn't bear being jilted or was upset for some other reason and took her own life. Whatever the case, she's not of this world. You've probably heard variations of this story before. Legends of ghostly women in white have been reported for centuries, not just in the United States, but all over the world. Here are 5 creepy women in white legends. Number 1. East 8 Mile Road. You probably know about Detroit's 8 Mile Road that famously divides the city, but you may not be familiar with the similarly named East 8 Mile Road in California. The road runs through Stockton, about 50 miles south of Sacramento, and is occupied by more than just the occasional turtle or deer. According to motorists who use the road at night, a woman wearing a white dress often appears on the side of the road, or even in the middle. But if you're thinking, well, I'm going to ignore her just to be safe, think again. Even if you don't pick her up, she allegedly disappears from the road, only to appear in your back seat. Stories also say she's killed drivers before, so this is one malevolent ghost. But she's not alone on the road. The ghost of a Native American girl reportedly wanders the area as well. Legend says she was killed in an accident on the road, and her screams can be heard at night. Number 2. Dallas, Texas. My more fashion-forward listeners might be familiar with high-end clothing brand Neiman Marcus, but I bet you never thought you'd hear about it in a ghost story. In White Lake Rock Park in East Dallas, stories date back to the 1930s of a ghost girl in a long white Neiman Marcus dress. They say she appears to motorists at the park, soaking wet. If someone offers her a ride home, she gives them an address about 1.5 miles away and hops right in. But at some point in the journey, she disappears, leaving nothing but a puddle behind. The motorist decides to check out the address the woman gave, maybe out of curiosity. When he or she arrives at what turns out to be an ordinary house, they knock on the door and a man answers. When the motorist tells the man what happened, he says the girl perfectly fits the description of his daughter, who drowned in the lake. Some versions say her death was an accident. Others say she committed suicide by jumping in. One sighting of the so-called Lady of the Lake was by a Neiman Marcus employee who must have recognized the girl's dress as being made by the brand. When he and his wife approached the girl's father, he informed them that his daughter loved Neiman Marcus and wore nothing else. I guess if you're going to encounter a ghost, it might as well be one with style. Number 3. Disneyland. I've talked before about ghosts that haunt the various Disney parks around the world. One that hangs around the Anaheim location is a notorious woman in white. And, unsurprisingly for the happiest place on earth, she's not only benign, but pretty helpful. The woman has been spotted on Main Street, often window shopping, so maybe we have another fashion-savvy ghost. She reportedly wears clothes reminiscent of the early 1900s, and is thought to hang around Main Street because of its old-timey feel. She also appears at guest services, guiding lost children there so they can be reunited with their parents. How sweet of her. Like the other ghosts on this list, not much is known about the woman's life. The Anaheim Park was opened in 1955, so based on her clothes, she likely predates it. The property used to be orange groves, so maybe she worked or spent time there before her death. Whatever the case, I'm glad to have a friendly ghost on the list. Number 4. The United Kingdom. For the next woman in white, us Americans will travel across the pond to the UK. There are gobs of legends there that fit the woman in white bill, but the one that stood out to me the most was the one at the Old Mill Hotel. This hotel is located in Motherwell, Scotland, about 15 miles southeast of Glasgow. The town boasts just over 30,000 residents, but not all of them are living. According to the legend, the woman was set to be married in the hotel, but her fiancé jilted her at the altar and, as if that wasn't bad enough, she was attacked and beaten by another man who also had feelings for her. Why did he do this? Who knows? But apparently the woman was so upset as she ran away that she didn't notice when she jumped in front of a train. Though she wasn't actually hit by the train, she only died of fright. Kind of an anticlimactic ending if you ask me, but hey, I'm just the messenger. After the woman's death, she haunted the fiancé who jilted her, still wearing her wedding dress. Frankly, if I were her, I'd haunt the man who beat me up, but to each her own, I guess. Today, the woman is said to be buried near the hotel, and her ghost has been spotted under a tree on the property. Number 5. Malta. 50 miles south of Sicily, Italy, lie the Maltese Islands. With a rich history dating all the way back to prehistoric times, it's no surprise that Malta has its share of spirits, including its own woman in white. This woman haunts Verdala Palace, built all the way back in 1586. It was briefly used as a military prison during the French rule of the island, which lasted a long and impressive 2 years. But it's been used as the private summer residence for the President of Malta since 1987. Like the others on this list, it's unclear who this woman was while in life, or even when she died. But as the legend goes, she was forced to marry a man she didn't love. In some versions of the story, he's a knight. On her wedding day, the disgruntled bride-to-be refused to accept her fate and jumped off a balcony to her death, still in her wedding dress. Another version of the legend refers to her as the Blue Lady and says she didn't commit suicide, but tried to escape the palace through a window and fell to her death. Regardless of how she may have died, she reportedly never left the grounds and has been spotted around the balcony. Palace guests have claimed to see her during the annual August Moon Ball, the only time the palace is open to the public. On an October day in 1872, a 47-year-old woman in Connecticut died. People die every day, of course, so this was nothing unusual, at least at first. But something happened after this woman's death that inspired a local legend. Let's talk about Mary Hart, better known as Midnight Mary. There isn't much information readily available on Mary's early life. We know she was born on December 16, 1824, and that she later married a man named James P. Hart. At noon on October 14, 1872, 47-year-old Mary fainted, possibly after having a stroke. 12 hours later, she died at midnight on October 15th. Her headstone was engraved with a poetic retelling of her last days. The people shall be troubled at midnight and pass away at high noon. just from and about to renew her daily work in her full strength of body and mind. Mary E. Hart, having fallen prostrate, remained unconscious until she died at midnight, October 15th, 1872. Sometime after Mary's death, a couple of stories sprung up about her. The most well-known account goes as follows. After Mary was thought to have died at midnight on October 15th, her family had her buried quickly. But the following night, her aunt had a dream that Mary was still alive in her coffin. She went to the cemetery owners and had them exhume Mary's grave. When her coffin was opened, the inside was shredded, and Mary had blood under her nails. It seemed she really had been the victim of a premature burial, but had died while underneath the ground. The main thing that seems to have fueled most of the stories about Mary is the first line on her tombstone: "The people shall be troubled at midnight and pass away." People have interpreted it to mean Mary was angry about being buried alive and wanted to lash out. As the story goes, her vengeful spirit has endured in the afterlife. She is said to roam the area around her former home on Winthrop Avenue, not too far from Evergreen Cemetery in New Haven, where she was buried. A woman who closely resembles her will reportedly hitch a ride with passing motorists from time to time. In true vanishing hitchhiker fashion, the motorist would return to Mary's house the next day for some reason, only to discover that their passenger had been a ghost all along. Another version of the story says Mary was a witch and her grave was cursed. If anyone visited it at midnight, she would rise up and kill them. Other versions say anyone who struck her grave would die at midnight. Over the years, multiple people have posted their alleged experiences with Mary online. In one account, a girl claimed her boyfriend's dad went to the grave with some of his friends one night. One of his friends peed on the grave and was taken to the hospital after receiving claw marks on his nether regions. Another person claimed their cousin got claw marks on his back after spitting on the grave. Yet another account comes from an individual who said they got severe stomach cramps after photographing the grave at noon. Another story that's been reported in various newspapers concerns a woman who lives near Evergreen Cemetery. As the story goes, one night she visited the cemetery with her cousin, but at some point they got separated. The woman thought she heard her cousin calling out for her and walked in the direction she thought the sound was coming from. When she reached the cemetery gate, she saw her cousin approaching from the opposite side she'd heard the noise from, and her cousin apparently hadn't been calling out for her at all. And even the cemetery's general manager has had a strange experience there. Late one night, he got a call about an alarm going off at the cemetery. He asked the security company for more information, but they seemed reluctant to give him any. So he drove to the cemetery office where, right at 11:59 p.m., he heard a strange noise. He dashed from the building as fast as he could and had trouble getting his car to start at first, but he managed to get it going. He exited the cemetery gates right at midnight. When he got back to work the next day, there was no record of the alarm going off at all the night before. So what's going on here? Is there really a vengeful ghost out there who's angry about her agonizing death and wanted to lash out at the common people? As is often the case with these tales, the truth is a bit less sensational. Most of these legends seem to have originated from the strange inscription on Mary's grave. Much of it simply details the circumstances of her death. It never mentions being buried alive, so we don't really know if that's true. But what about the first line? The people shall be troubled at midnight and pass away. Does this really mean Mary will kill you at midnight if you disturb her grave? Well, no. This is actually taken from a passage from the Bible, specifically the book of Job, chapter 34, verse 20. The entire verse reads as follows: "In a moment shall they die, and the people shall be troubled at midnight and pass away, and the mighty shall be taken away without hand." If you're not familiar with the biblical story, Job is a man who seems to lead a pretty good life until he loses his livestock, all of his possessions, and his many children. The book is all about how even good, God-fearing people will sometimes endure suffering, and the passage on Mary's tomb deals with accepting the inevitable, such as death. So are all the strange encounters at Mary's grave real or fictional? Did people really have paranormal experiences there after interacting with her tombstone? As with all supernatural stories, I will let you decide for yourself what you believe. But the stories of Mary being buried alive or being a witch are just that, stories. Thanks for watching and have a creepy day. About a year ago, I made a video on Dumas Beach, a beach in India that's rumored to be haunted. That video was supposed to be a list video, but there was so much on Dumas Beach, I decided to just make it its own thing. With summer on the horizon again, I thought I'd revisit the topic of haunted beaches, just in case you want some spooks and spirits to go with your sunblock and umbrellas. Let's talk about 5 creepy haunted beaches across the world. Number 1. Higbee Beach. New Jersey. It gets a bad reputation, but the Garden State has brought us some pretty cool people like Frank Sinatra, George R.R. Martin, and the Jonas Brothers. But a beach on the state's southernmost tip is home to some darker things. Higbee Beach in Cape May, New Jersey was once home to a hotel called the Hermitage. When owner Thomas Higbee died in 1879, he wanted to be buried on the beach, and he got his wish. Temporarily. In 1937, either Higbee's wife or his niece died. Different sources said different things. But whatever their relationship, she decided before her death that she wanted Higbee buried with her instead. So his grave was moved to a church in the city, though it was supposedly ordered to be filled with sand from the beach. But Higbee may not have wanted to be moved from the beach he worked on in life. Witnesses have spotted a ghostly man wandering the beach at dusk, either wearing a coat or a tattered pants and shirt, depending on the version. Sometimes he has a black dog with him, and he's also reportedly been spotted chasing a ghost slave. Other ghosts include early settlers to the area and tribespeople. Number 2. Omaha Beach. Our next topic concerns something a bit more serious, as Omaha Beach is the site of a real, documented event. This 10-mile stretch of beach in Normandy, France, was the site of the famous D-Day invasion on June 6, 1944. Estimates for the number of Allied forces killed are as low as 4,000 and as high as 12,000. For the Germans, it's between 4,000 and 9,000. In modern times, one visitor who claimed to go there at night said they felt like someone was watching them. A week later, they talked to other group members who'd gone with them, only to realize they'd all felt the same way and nobody had spoken up. Several other visitors who went on different occasions have reported a similar feeling, presumably when there was nobody else in the area other than the people they came with. A Reddit user who visited the area on his honeymoon said he took a photograph in pitch black with the flash on. When his new wife looked at the photograph later, she thought she saw a face in the darkness. Check out the photo on screen and decide for yourself what you believe. Number 3. Baker Beach. This mile-long beach in San Francisco offers a view of one of the city's famous locations, the Golden Gate Bridge. But it's also just a few miles away from another famous location, Alcatraz, and both these landmarks are rumored to be haunted themselves. Perhaps being so close to so much paranormal activity has given Baker Beach some ghostly visitors of its own. As the story goes, a ghost woman loves to sing by the shore. But don't be fooled into thinking you're just getting a free concert when you see her. Her voice is so hypnotizing, she's said to put visitors under a spell and drag them into the ocean, similar to the sirens of Greek mythology. I haven't seen any theories on who this woman is or why she haunts Baker Beach. Maybe she actually died on the Golden Gate Bridge, Alcatraz, or another nearby location. Then again, if that was the case, why wouldn't she just haunt those places? Maybe she loved beaches in life and wants to spend her afterlife there as well. There are also reportedly a lot of disappearances here. A quick Google search comes up with plenty of results for people who went missing in the Bay Area in general, but it's not clear if they're related to the alleged hauntings of Baker Beach. Number 4. Coquina Beach. On the southern end of Anna Maria Island in Bradenton Beach, Florida, just over 50 miles south of Tampa, lies Coquina Beach. There used to be a hotel on the island that reportedly catered to tourists, but closed when it faced too much competition from other similar hotels in the area. But the area where the hotel used to be might have a ghostly visitor. Witnesses have reported seeing a man here, wearing all black and walking around the picnic tables that now occupy the area. Now, I know what some of you are probably thinking. How on earth is this a ghost story? Isn't this just some creeper and shouldn't someone call the police? I thought the same things too when I first heard this story, but then I thought about it. This man has presumably been showing up for a while now, and surely someone did call the police on him at some point. But what did the police find? If they did manage to talk to the man and tell him to leave, wouldn't that be part of the story? No, if this was just your run-of-the-mill weirdo, surely he would have been discovered as such by now. Other paranormal reports include disembodied voices near the water and shadowy figures on the beach. There's also the ghost of an old man who seems disoriented and disappears if you try to approach him. Number 5. Jenny Dixon Beach. I've made at least one video in the past discussing the famous vanishing hitchhiker legend. The story is usually the same. A young, beautiful woman hitches a ride late at night, only to disappear in the car on the way to their destination. In my research on that video, I somehow missed the legend of Jenny Dixon. This ghost woman reportedly haunts an area near the beach on Wilfred Barrett Drive in New South Wales, Australia. Like the others, she doesn't talk much on the ride and disappears before you can drop her off anywhere. Another version says she disappears when the driver passes nearby Norville Cemetery. Local legends tell the story of Jenny Dixon's alleged but brutal end. She was killed by 5 men she hitched a ride with in the 1950s or 1970s. Frankly, the lack of an accurate year or even decade says to me it's probably not true, but let's keep going. Jenny was found on the beach shortly after being attacked. She was still alive, but died soon after. Before dying, she vowed to get her revenge. Her attackers were never caught, but over the next year, they all died under unusual circumstances. Before dying, at least one of the men told family members he'd been seeing a mysterious girl. Some versions of the story say the beach was named after Jenny Dixon. Others say it was named after a ship called the Janet Dixon that wrecked along the shore. There were no deaths in this particular accident, but many other shipwreck victims in the area weren't so lucky. Do their restless souls still occupy the beach? One reported haunting along the beach is that of a ghost woman who wears 1800s-style clothing and approaches visitors with outstretched arms. Some say she looks like she's asking for help. Others say she looks like she's beckoning you to join her. It's been theorized that either this woman or her son died in one of the many shipwrecks along the beach. But it doesn't look like anyone will get a chance to ask her. It's clear by her physical form that she's a ghost, so most visitors are too scared to even try to approach her. So, stop me if you've heard this one before. A young man spots a beautiful woman on the side of the road and gives her a ride home. But after he drops her off, he realizes she left her jacket in his car. So he goes back to her house, only to be greeted by an older woman who says the girl doesn't live there. Once he describes his former passenger, the woman says he just perfectly described her daughter, who died in a car accident years ago on that very stretch of road he picked her up on. Sounds familiar, right? The vanishing hitchhiker legend has been around for at least 100 years, and its origins probably stretch back even further. Let's explore the legend of the vanishing hitchhiker. There are literally hundreds of different versions of this legend, all with different details. But the basic story, at least here in the United States, goes something like this. A man is driving alone late at night when he sees a beautiful woman on the side of the road, looking for a ride. He picks her up and she gives him directions to her house. When they get there, she thanks him for the ride and goes inside. But later that night or the next day, the man realizes that she left something in his car, usually an item of clothing like a jacket or scarf, maybe a pack of cigarettes. Now knowing where the woman lives, he goes back to her house to deliver the object she forgot. But once he gets there, he's greeted by a relative of the woman, her mother, maybe her sister. The relative explains to the man that the woman actually died years ago on that same stretch of road. Sometimes the man will learn that the clothes she was wearing were the clothes she was buried in, or that she appears every year on the anniversary of her death. In some versions, the man actually gives the woman his jacket, but she forgets to give it back. When he goes back to the house, he learns the truth about the woman. Then he goes to the cemetery where she was buried, having been given the directions from the woman's mother or sister, and he finds his jacket on her gravestone, folded neatly at the bottom. So that's the basic version that you've probably heard a million times. There are way too many different versions to go over here. It would take all day. But I want to talk about just a few different variations. Some of them you may have heard of, some of them not. Believe it or not, the earliest similar story appears in the Bible. A passage in the book of Acts tells the story of the apostle Philip, who is traveling to Gaza and meets an Ethiopian man. Now an angel of the Lord said to Philip, "Go south to the road, the desert road, that goes down from Jerusalem to Gaza." So he started out, and on his way, he met an Ethiopian eunuch, an important official in charge of all the treasury of the Kandake, which means Queen of the Ethiopians. This man had gone to Jerusalem to worship, and on his way home was sitting in his chariot, reading the book of Isaiah the prophet. The Spirit told Philip, "Go to that chariot and stay near it." Then Philip ran up to the chariot and heard the man reading Isaiah the prophet. "Do you understand what you are reading?" Philip asked. "How can I," he said, "unless someone explains it to me?" So he invited Philip to come up and sit with him. This is the passage of scripture the eunuch was reading. "He was led like a sheep to the slaughter, and as a lamb before its shearer is silent, so he did not open his mouth. In his humiliation he was deprived of justice. Who can speak of his descendants? For his life was taken from the earth." The eunuch asked Philip, "Tell me, please, who is the prophet talking about, himself or someone else?" Then Philip began with that very passage of scripture and told him the good news about Jesus. As they traveled along the road, they came to some water, and the eunuch said, "Look, here is water. What can stand in the way of my being baptized?" And he gave orders to stop the chariot. Then both Philip and the eunuch went down into the water, and Philip baptized him. When they came up out of the water, the Spirit of the Lord suddenly took Philip away, and the eunuch did not see him again, but went on his way rejoicing. So this story is a little bit different than the one you're probably used to hearing. But another more modern story that more closely follows the traditional formula tells of a woman known as Lydia the Phantom Hitchhiker. Lydia is said to haunt a curvy stretch of US 70A in North Carolina. She wears a white evening dress and desperately tries to flag down motorists. If someone offers her a ride, she gets in and introduces herself as Lydia, saying she's on her way home from a dance. In some versions, she's a bit younger and is on her way home from prom. Lydia gives the driver her address, but if the driver attempts to make conversation beyond that, Lydia seems like she is in another world. When the driver gets to Lydia's house, she's disappeared from the back seat. The driver, usually a man, rings the doorbell and is greeted by an older woman. He explains what happened, and the woman shows him a photograph of her daughter Lydia, who died in a car accident on that stretch of road in 1923. She also informs the driver that Lydia has done this before. She thinks her daughter doesn't realize she's dead and is just trying to get home. But as with many of these legends, it can't be historically verified. Nobody named Lydia died in a car crash in 1923 in that area. However, a 30-year-old woman named Annie Jackson did die in a car crash on that same stretch of road in 1920. Other sources say the girl's real name was Mary. Perhaps there was a mixing up of the names, but if the ghost is real, is she really the ghost of Annie Jackson? I'll let you decide. Another popular vanishing hitchhiker story is Resurrection Mary, which I've talked about in a video before. Mary's story dates back to the 1930s, when usually male drivers would report seeing a beautiful woman outside a dance hall in the suburbs of Chicago. When they picked her up, Mary would tell them she was leaving a dance and give them her home address. But when the driver arrived at the address Mary had given him, he was parked in front of Resurrection Cemetery. He would park the car and Mary would get out and walk a few steps to the cemetery before disappearing into thin air. Just like Lydia, it's not really clear who Mary was in real life. Unsurprisingly, she is said to be buried in Resurrection Cemetery, and there are a few different women there who people believe she might be. Like I said, I did talk about this in an older video. It's not very good, but if you want to check it out for yourself, feel free. I don't know if you're familiar with the show Beyond Belief, Fact or Fiction. The premise of the story involves a narrator presenting the audience with 5 different short dramatizations, all with some sort of bizarre, seemingly inexplicable happenings. At the end of the show, viewers get to find out whether these stories were based on true events or made up, and see if their guesses were correct. I used to watch the show all the time when I was a kid. I couldn't find the exact episode, but there was one that featured a story similar to the vanishing hitchhiker legend. The man who picked the woman up was greeted at the door by the woman's sister, who told him that the woman had died in an accident. The man and the sister of his dead passenger ended up getting married. But as romantic as this is, the story, of course, turned out to be complete fiction. There is another popular legend that is similar to the vanishing hitchhiker story. A motorist, again, usually male, is flagged down by a woman while he's driving at night. The woman seems desperate and tells the man that she's just been in a car accident and her baby is still trapped inside. She leads the man to the wreck, but then disappears. The man, of course, finds the baby inside and is able to save them, but he also finds the woman's body in the car, and it's clear that she died in the car crash or shortly thereafter. Hawaii has its own version of this legend. In this one, motorists encounter an old woman climbing a volcano. They offer her a ride and she accepts, but later disappears from the back seat. As it turns out, the woman is Pele, the Hawaiian goddess of fire and volcanoes. She often appears to mortals and asks for their aid, punishing those who refuse. In African tradition, the vanishing hitchhiker usually turns out to be a jinni, which I really hope I'm pronouncing right. It's the singular form of jinn, which is a word you may have heard before, probably on Supernatural. The jinni, or genie, is a popular mythical creature in Africa and the Middle East. Jinn were evil spirits that sometimes took the form of animals, and were often said to possess men. The last version I want to share is a Spanish urban legend called La Chica de la Curva, or the Curve Girl. Not because she was curvy, but because she haunted a particular curve in the road. There are a few different versions of this one, but this is the one I could find the best translation for. A man is making his way home from work one night, and it's storming outside. As he drives down a particular stretch of road, he remembers the legends of the girl who supposedly haunts it, but he never really believed them. That is, until the woman appears in his back seat. This is reminiscent of the Woman in White of Stockton, California, which I've also talked about before. But it's difficult to feel too bad for this man. As it turns out, he was actually the one who hit this girl and killed her on that road. So she kills him in revenge. Honestly, I did not see this ending coming the first time I heard the story. Maybe I'm just an idiot. So clearly the vanishing hitchhiker legend is very widespread, with stories from all over the world. But where did it originally come from? In the early 1940s, 2 researchers set to find out just that. Richard K. Beardsley and Rosalie Hankey did 2 studies on the legend, trying to connect it to an origin story, but ultimately failing to do so. Their first study, The Vanishing Hitchhiker, was published in 1942 in a journal then known as California Folklore Quarterly. Beardsley and Hankey connected 79 stories from 60 different cities across the United States and one from Mexico, trying to find the one the story originated from. They also compared and contrasted different versions. They initially thought the origin story came from one of the stories they collected, a story that happened in Berkeley, California in the 1930s. But once they researched the story they'd heard, it turned out no fatal accidents of that sort had occurred in Berkeley at the time. They ultimately concluded that the story had modern origins, since they couldn't find any versions of it that definitively dated any further back than 1912. Their next study was called A History of the Vanishing Hitchhiker and was published the next year. In this one, they further solidified their conclusion that the story was a modern one. The story may have gotten inspiration from older stories, but was essentially a newer story, at least in the incarnation we're used to hearing. They also noted that the phenomenon of ghosts appearing in human form was also a relatively modern thing, not really happening very frequently until the 1800s or so. So, is the legend really a modern one? Well, sort of. The story usually involves an automobile, which would kind of give that away. But the story has been appearing in various versions even further back than Beardsley and Hankey knew. Remember, they collected stories largely within the continental United States, along with one in Mexico and one in Hawaii. They even admitted in their second study that they hadn't been able to collect stories from places like Europe, South America, and Canada. And as we've already seen, the story stretches far wider across the globe than that. In 1998, another paper was published in that journal, now called Western Folklore. Two more researchers found several more versions of the story that dated far further back than the 1800s. One I found particularly interesting came from Sweden and dates back to 1602, in which two travelers encountered a girl on the road who predicted wars and plagues before promptly disappearing. There are many different versions, even of the modern legend that involved prophesying vanishing hitchhikers, or hitchhikers that turned out to be some sort of angelic beings. I'm not familiar enough with Swedish history to know if these prophecies actually came true. But given how many wars and plagues there have been throughout history, they probably did. So we've talked about the story, different versions, and potential origins. But one other question remains. Why is the story so compelling? Why have people kept retelling it for dozens, maybe even hundreds of years, all over the world? Regardless of the version or details, most of these stories have some sort of element we can easily identify with. The driver is usually an ordinary person, giving the impression that something like this could happen to us. It also speaks to the dangers of hitchhiking, which are all too real, even today. I recently did a video on the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders, in which at least 7 young women were brutally murdered while hitchhiking in or near Santa Rosa, California. Those murders remain unsolved to this day. Hitchhiking is clearly dangerous for passengers, but something that's not often talked about is the potential danger for drivers. The vanishing hitchhiker legend reminds us that if we pick up a hitchhiker, no matter how good our intentions, we never really know who we're letting into our cars. As I've noted several times already, the standard version of this story usually involves a male driver picking up a beautiful young woman and offering her a ride. Obviously, this man's intentions could be less than honorable. He might want to get into more than just her house, if you know what I mean. But it could also say something about the instinct that most men have to protect women. The versions with prophesying hitchhikers speak to our desire to know what's coming. And ghost stories in general speak to our uncomfortableness with tragic deaths. Nobody likes hearing about a young person dying or anyone dying a violent death. Ghosts in Western culture are often thought to have unfinished business. And surely they would come back to Earth to finish doing whatever they were doing when their lives were cut short. The similar version with the ghost mother saving her baby could speak to a mother's instinct to protect her children. Most mothers wouldn't be able to come back from the dead to save their babies' lives, but they would certainly give their own lives to keep their children safe. Another interesting theory I found deals with how the story morphed from an ordinary one to something paranormal. I found it on Reddit, which, as I've been discovering over the past few months, is a very interesting place. The post was made by a user named Winnowing Winds on a post about the vanishing hitchhiker legend. I imagine some of these stories are rooted in deep exaggeration. Guy drives a hitchhiker home. He realizes she left her sweater in his car and drives back to her house to return it. The person who answers the door says, Dorothy Smith doesn't live here. Guy goes to bar and tells his friends. Friends tell their friends, and suddenly, Dorothy Smith's been dead for 15 years, even though that's not what was said. The explanation, meanwhile, is rather simple. Dorothy decided not to tell a stranger where exactly she lived and had him drop her off a block away from her actual house. Or maybe Dorothy's mother didn't approve of a strange man calling on her daughter, even just to return something, and pretended not to know Dorothy. They also served as cautionary tales. Even when hitchhiking was very common, people still realized there was a risk. Stories like these point out that you don't really know who you're letting ride in your car. Of course, I already discussed the theory about the dangers of hitchhiking, but this possible explanation for the truth behind the stories is, as this user said, surprisingly simple. It reminds me of those stories you hear where a man catches a fish that gets bigger every time he tells the story. Or the game Telephone that you may have played in elementary school, where one person whispers a message to a person in the class, and then the message goes around the class, and by the time it gets to the last person, it's completely different. That game is usually done by teachers, specifically to show how rumors get started. And really, this theory could apply to a lot of the paranormal stories I talk about on this channel. The last story I want to revisit is the biblical one. Even though I grew up in church and have read the Bible, okay, most of the Bible, I wasn't actually familiar with this story before I started researching this video. Remember, the story involves Philip encountering an Ethiopian man on the way to Gaza. The Ethiopian is reading a Bible passage and asks Philip to explain it. Philip ministers to the man who decides to be baptized. Then after the baptism, Philip promptly disappears. This story is apparently supposed to be about how God often has plans for us that we don't expect. And also about how if we really want to be baptized and become Christians, nothing is really going to stop us. Note the water conveniently appearing when they needed it. Obviously, not everyone watching my videos is religious, so this might not apply to you. But I do wonder if this story at least partially influenced the vanishing hitchhiker legend we know today. Or if it is, in fact, maybe even the oldest version of the story.
Hey everyone, Editing Mary here. Please excuse my more disgusting than usual appearance. So I'm an idiot and probably should have thought to do this before I filmed the video, but as I was editing, I decided to ask my dad about this story, who of course was a Methodist pastor for more than 40 years. And he said the story was basically just another example of how the message of Jesus was spread throughout the world. So obviously the story was never really meant to be a ghost story, but I do wonder if it had any sort of kind of unintentional influence on the vanishing hitchhiker story that we know today.
So what do you think of this ubiquitous legend? What other versions have you heard that you found interesting? Have you ever had your own experience with an incident like this, whether directly or hearing it from a friend or a friend of a friend, as the saying goes? Let me know in the comments. There are hundreds, maybe even thousands of places around the world that are rumored to be haunted. A lot of them have the same characteristics: flickering lights, strange disembodied noises, or even apparitions. But some supposedly haunted hotspots have dubious claims behind them. Let's talk about Mount Pleasant, a cemetery that may or may not actually have ghosts living there. Located at 375 Mount Pleasant Road in Toronto, this cemetery was established in 1876. It's part of the Mount Pleasant Group, an organization whose first cemetery, Potter's Field, was established in the early 1820s to provide Toronto's first burial ground for non-Catholics. Before this, only Catholics and Anglicans could officially be buried inside the city limits. Once called the Central Park for Midtown Toronto, Mount Pleasant is also known for its arboretum, with hundreds of trees and one of the most impressive collections in North America. The earliest writing I could find online about Mount Pleasant's hauntings was from 2009. A group called Ghost Club, which I assume is a paranormal group, went there to do an investigation, having already heard a few unspecified stories. According to their blog, the land Mount Pleasant now sits on was once inhabited by superstitious people who used it to practice black magic, which could account for some paranormal activity. But after a thorough investigation that produced no evidence of ghosts other than a few potential orb photos, they concluded it probably wasn't haunted. Then in August 2010, a photo was taken at the cemetery that appeared to show a phantom face over a grave. The cemetery and the area around the grave were subsequently investigated by the Ontario Catholic Paranormal Research Society. At first, OCPRS members thought the figure could actually be a demon. They did EVP recordings around the grave but found very little. One strange sound was picked up with a line they believed might have been, "I'll be watching you." They knew the sound wasn't natural but weren't sure just what it was or where it came from. They also investigated the Massey tomb, which was across from the Pollock's tomb where the original photo had been taken. The Massey family used to live at Keg Mansion, another famous haunted place in Toronto, so maybe they thought this grave could have something to do with the paranormal activity. But just like ghost clubs, this particular investigation found very little out of the ordinary. I will leave a link below to a video they posted about their investigation if you want to know more. Other reported paranormal activity at Mount Pleasant includes strange noises, electrical problems, weird lights, and disembodied voices. One employee claimed to be pushed off a tractor by an unknown invisible force. Mount Pleasant is also the final resting place of Mackenzie King, a former Prime Minister of Canada. According to the website Streeter, King was secretly a spiritualist who is said to regularly talk to his dead mother during his time in office. I couldn't find any Mount Pleasant hauntings attributed to him, but he is said to haunt his old home, the Mackenzie King Estate in Ottawa's Gatineau Park. So maybe he pulls double duty sometimes and also causes mischief around his final resting place. So those are all the paranormal stories of Mount Pleasant Cemetery that I could find. There's not too much information online on this one, but I'm always interested in stories of haunted places that don't have much evidence behind them or where a lot of the hauntings have seemingly been debunked. Is all this paranormal evidence really just people's mind playing tricks on them? Did someone make all of this up entirely and it's just one big hoax? Or is Mount Pleasant really haunted and for whatever reason, the stories and details just aren't talked about much, at least not online? As always, I will let you decide for yourself what you believe. I love going to cemeteries. They're a great way to get some peace and quiet, connect with nature, and take a metaphorical trip through history. But sometimes it's hard to forget that just a few feet beneath you lie the remains of hundreds of, well, dead people. Maybe it's for this reason that cemeteries have a reputation for some strange goings-on. Here are 4 creepy haunted cemeteries from around the world. The Salem witch trials represent a dark chapter of early American history. In 1692, 180 people in Salem, Massachusetts, most of them teenagers, were accused of witchcraft. 19 of these people were ultimately hanged, and one of them was pressed to death, 81-year-old Giles Corey. As Corey died a slow, agonizing death, he was quoted as only saying more weight, as heavier stones were gradually pressed on top of him. Before he died, he reportedly put a curse on every future sheriff in Salem. The curse is said to have been lifted in the 1990s when the sheriff's office moved. After his death, Corey would be buried in the field that would become Branch Street Cemetery in 1801 and Howard Street Cemetery in 1828. Today, his ghost is said to roam his permanent home, looking for revenge for his unjust execution. His ghost is thought to be an omen of disaster, supposedly making his rare appearances just before something bad happens. The earliest sighting I could find was right before the Great Salem Fire of 1914, which killed 3 people and injured 60 more. Probably the most well-known place on this list, the catacombs were consecrated as the Paris Municipal Ossuary in 1786. Today, they get over 500,000 visitors a year who come to see the millions of bodies decoratively arranged in bizarre yet morbidly fascinating ways. With so many human remains arranged so unusually, it's no surprise that the catacombs have their share of ghostly legends. Stories range from EVP anomalies to orb and mist photography. Rumor has it that if you go down to the catacombs after midnight, the walls will speak to you, with disembodied voices that try to confuse you and get you lost in the maze of tunnels and labyrinths. The only actual ghost story that seems to be associated with the catacombs is that of Philibert Aspert, who got lost down there in 1793 and never made it out. His body was found a few years later in 1804 and buried in the same spot. Aspert's ghost is said to appear in the catacombs every year on November 3rd, the presumed anniversary of his untimely death. A fun side note, Aspert also appears in the popular video game franchise Assassin's Creed. There is one more creepy story associated with the catacombs, but it's more urban legend than paranormal. People say there's a videotape made by a man exploring the catacombs in the 1990s. The deeper he goes, the more clear it becomes that he's hopelessly and maybe even fatally lost. It's not clear who the man is, what happened to him, or even if the footage is real. But it definitely plays on the found footage craze of the time, as well as the fear of getting lost in this vast underground maze and never being able to find your way out. I've talked before on this channel about the vampire of Highgate Cemetery, but Highgate is not the UK's only graveyard with rumors of this sort. Already a pretty decent tourist attraction in Scotland, the Glasgow necropolis had its first burial in 1892. Over 50,000 people are buried there now, but do some among the undead also call this place home? There are several rumors of typical hauntings here, including moving gravestones, a ghost boy, and a woman in white. But the most famous legend is that of the Gorbals vampire. This monstrous creature is said to be 7 feet tall, with iron teeth and glowing red eyes. As the story goes, 2 children in the 1950s were killed by the vampire. When their classmates heard about this, they descended in a mob upon the cemetery to rid the world of the vampire once and for all. Sources vary on exactly how many kids were there, anywhere from 50 to 400. The hunt was ultimately broken up by either the police or a local teacher, again depending on what source you look at. Another source said the group only dispersed when it started to rain. The legend supposedly still crops up from time to time, but information on any specifics is sorely lacking online. So where did it come from? Some people have suggested stories of the Gorbals vampire derived from an earlier legend about a witch who ate children in the 1800s. Author David Castleton speculates that the legend rose from the impoverished Scottish district that gave the Gorbals vampire its name. According to Castleton, both of these aforementioned creatures may have been personifications of the hazards faced by the urban industrial poor. Today, most people chalk up the Gorbals vampire legend to mob mentality and mass hysteria. But you never know. The vampire could still be lurking out there somewhere. Women in white are a pretty popular staple in discussions on the paranormal. I've talked about them numerous times on this channel. And Union Cemetery in Easton, Connecticut has yet another one of these legends to add to the list. There are a few different versions of the story, but most of them involve these basic details. A man is driving alone at night on the road by the cemetery. Then he sees a woman wearing a long, flowing white gown. She's standing in the middle of the road, but he doesn't see her in time and can't stop, accidentally running her over. But when he gets out of the car to inspect the scene, there's nothing there. Sometimes there's even damage to his car, but the woman in white is nowhere to be found. So who is this woman in white? What could she have possibly gone through in life to cause her to want to stay behind and terrorize motorists in the afterlife? Nobody knows for sure, but there are a few theories. One is that the woman killed her husband. Another is that she was killed and her body was dumped near the cemetery. Others believe she died in childbirth and wanders the cemetery in the afterlife, looking for her baby. Some have suggested Harriet Seeley as the identity of the woman. Harriet gave birth to a baby boy who died on May 21st, 1853. Harriet followed just a week later. It's not clear just what caused their deaths, but is Harriet the woman in white? The woman was reportedly captured on film by famous paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren, who lived in the area. They kept the evidence hidden from the public, saying it was because the video was so valuable. It's no secret that the Warrens are controversial, with a simple Google search pulling up multiple results suggesting their entire body of work was fraudulent, and keeping their supposed ghost evidence under lock and key is a bit odd. But as always, I will let my viewers decide for themselves what they believe. Other reported paranormal activity at the cemetery includes phantom whispers and voices, orb photos, and a ghost named Red Eyes who peers at people from bushes. That's creepy. The ghost is said to be that of Earl Kellogg, who was supposedly killed across the street from the cemetery in 1935. Nothing is readily available online that suggests the existence of Earl Kellogg or a murder that fits this description. Have the records just never been archived online, or is this story nothing more than a legend? Japan is filled to the brim with all sorts of terrifying urban legends. I'll never get tired of hearing stories like Teki Teki or the Slit-Mouthed Woman. But for this video, I want to explore a story that I've been seeing all over the internet and was really curious about. Once I actually looked into it, it was a lot darker than I initially thought. This is the story of the Himuro Mansion. Like any legend, the story of Himuro Mansion has many different versions, but here's the full story from what I could piece together. The Himuro Mansion is a beautiful house located in a forest and or rocky area just outside Tokyo. But things aren't always as they appear. An evil force lurked beneath the surface of the house, appearing once every 50 years and attempting to make its way into the real world. Most sources referred to it as bad karma, but others just called it a portal to hell. For centuries, the Himuro family was charged with keeping this evil force at bay with a gruesome practice called the strangling ritual. In order to keep the bad karma / portal to hell from entering the world, a young girl was chosen at birth by the master of the household to be raised in isolation and secret with no ties to the outside world. Once the 50-year mark came and the ritual had to be carried out, the maiden was taken to a courtyard of the house. Some sources said the ritual took place in a room of the house or even tunneled underneath it, but I don't think that would leave them enough room for what they had to do. The maiden would be bound by ropes tied around her ankles, wrists, and neck. The ropes were then attached to teams of oxen or horses that went in all different directions, ripping her limbs from her body. Yeah, I told you it was gruesome. Once this was complete, the girl's blood-soaked ropes were untied and placed over the entrance to the portal. As terrible as this is, quartering the girl was apparently necessary because the demon / bad karma apparently exited her body through her limbs. So if those were removed, then the evil was kept at bay for the next 50 years, until another maiden was chosen and the Himuro family lathered, rinsed, and repeated. But one year, the ritual went wrong. In true Rapunzel-esque fashion, the sacrificial maiden fell in love with a man who watched her from her window and planned on saving her. I'm not sure how he planned to save her by watching her from her window, but I'm just the messenger. What do I know? Anyway, because the girl now had a connection to the outside world, her blood was tainted and the ritual wouldn't work. When the master of the house found out about this, he was furious. Knowing that the fate that awaited the family now would be far worse than anything he could do, he killed every member of his family, and then himself. Ever since, the house has been cursed. It sits abandoned, and most people who have visited are either never heard from again or later found dead. Not always in one piece. Those interested in the legend have attempted to find the mansion, but nobody can seem to agree on its exact location. Those who do claim to have found it report fresh blood splashes and bloody handprints on the wall. Ghosts roam the building, dressed in white and rinsing out cloths. It's thought these are the ghosts of the Himuro family, still preparing for the ritual in the afterlife. Legend says that if you take a picture of a certain window, a young girl in a kimono can be seen in the picture. People in the neighboring village are also reportedly cursed. So, no doubt this legend is creepy. But is it true? Well, probably not. For starters, there's no concrete time period for when the failed ritual took place. Some sources listed it as sometime within the last 80 years, while others put it at the beginning of the 1900s. Though I guess it could take place in the 1930s or 40s, and that would still technically be true, sort of. Nobody has ever actually been able to find the mansion, and all the eyewitness accounts come from others reporting them, sort of the friend of a friend mentality, which is how most urban legends are spread. And there's the fact that no murders of this sort have ever happened in Japan. I know, I looked. The closest I could find was a doomsday cult called Shinriko. The group was founded in the late 1980s by a man named Shoko Ashihara, who declared himself Jesus Christ and borrowed elements of Christianity, Hinduism, and Buddhism to create the group's philosophy. The group seems to be best known for a 1995 attack in which members left 5 bags of a nerve agent on Tokyo subways. 13 people were killed and nearly 6,000 were injured. Shoko Ashihara and 7 other cult members were executed in 2018. The cult still exists today, but in nowhere near as wide a capacity. It's considered a dangerous religion in Japan and kept under close watch. The US and several other countries consider it a terrorist organization. But other than the religious-themed killings of multiple people, this actual story and the Himuro Mansion legend don't seem to have much in common. So if the story of Himuro Mansion is obviously fiction, where did it come from? To answer that, let's go back to December 2001 when a survival horror game called Zero was released in Japan. Influenced by popular titles like Resident Evil and Silent Hill, the game was released in North America the following year as Fatal Frame. In Fatal Frame, you play as a teenage girl named Miku who goes to the Himuro Mansion to find her missing brother, who was last seen on the grounds. The most notable aspect of the series is the camera obscura, the player's main weapon that they use to fight ghosts. I know that sounds kind of weird, but I've watched Let's Plays of some of the games, and it makes sense once you actually see it. But what does Fatal Frame have to do with the Himuro Mansion, other than featuring a house of the same name? The North American release of the game reportedly advertised it as being based on a true story. In fact, reading through the description of the in-game mansion, a lot of details are remarkably similar to the Himuro Mansion legend. Most people who discuss the Himuro Mansion online seem to believe the legends began with Fatal Frame's North American release. It's not uncommon at all to see this in movies. A movie will be advertised as being based on a true story when that may or may not be true. So the logical conclusion is that someone had the same mentality with the game. They thought advertising Fatal Frame's story as true would create more buzz and potentially sell more copies. And some people actually believed the story. Now, the internet was pretty different back in the early 2000s. This was just a couple years after the Blair Witch Project was released. I was about 10 when that movie came out, and I remember my classmates discussing whether or not the movie was real. Nowadays, if I heard a story like the Blair Witch Project's plot or the Himuro Mansion legend, I could just whip up my smartphone and find out whether or not it was true in less than 30 seconds. But back in 2002, this wasn't as feasible. Not only did you have to go to a computer to use the internet, I know, it was the Dark Ages. But there wasn't quite as much information out there for the general public to access. This was before most newspapers and things like that were largely online. I can see why someone playing Fatal Frame back then and learning it was based on a true story might believe that, and without question. So don't judge them too harshly. That being said, there's not a whole lot of information out there about the legend other than a few online blogs on paranormal websites. Most of them link the legend back to Fatal Frame and assume the legend started circulating upon the game's North American release. Hey guys, so I was editing this video and realized I kind of contradicted myself. I just said there's not a lot of information online about the legend, but at the beginning of the video, I said I'd seen it all over the internet. Okay, that's not really a contradiction, but I wanted to explain. Being into horror and the paranormal, I see a lot of stories like this one when I'm browsing the web. So I did see the story a lot for several years at one point, but there still aren't a whole lot of details available on it, and you really have to dig for information. I hope that clarifies things. Back to the video. I did find one source that said Fatal Frame made the story more popular in the West, but that it was already pretty well known in Japan. But as much as I love Japanese urban legends, it's notoriously difficult to find anything about them online in the US. So I can't say for sure if this is true. If anyone out there is more knowledgeable than me on the subject, feel free to fill me in the comments. A couple more things before I wrap this video up. In my research, I also found a himuro shrine in the Nara prefecture of Japan. Apparently it's known for its ice festival and beautiful cherry trees. I also found a guy named Joe James, a filmmaker and musician who does electronic music under the name Himuro Mansion. Other than a song called Enter the Mansion that seems to reference elements of the Himuro Mansion story, I'm not sure his music has much to do with the actual legend. One last thing I want to mention is what the name Himuro apparently means. It comes from the Japanese word hi, meaning scarlet or red, and mura, meaning town or village. Red village? Sounds like someone was going for some pretty heavy symbolism. So what do you think of the legend of Himuro Mansion? Have you ever played Fatal Frame? Is it as creepy as it looks?
Every day in London, 5 million people, both resident and tourist alike, ride the London Underground across the city. Opened in 1863, the Underground, known affectionately as the Tube, is the oldest underground railway system in the world. With such a long history, it's no surprise that the Tube has its share of spirits. Here are 5 haunted London Underground stations. Number 1. King's Cross Station. Those in my generation mostly know King's Cross Station as a secret portal to the Hogwarts Express. But this station has more than just wizards hanging around without Muggle knowledge. On November 18, 1987, a fire broke out in the station. It began on an escalator, but rapidly spread, eventually killing 31 people. It was the Underground's deadliest fire to date, and prompted drastic changes in safety protocol for the Underground system. In past years, a woman has been spotted at the station. She is said to be wearing stylish clothing and screaming. The most well-known sighting was in 1998, in which a passerby stopped a sobbing young woman who, upon approach, abruptly disappeared. Some accounts even say she walked right through the passerby. Could this woman be a victim of that fire, lingering behind all these years after her tragic death? Number 2. Farringdon Station. In Farringdon Station, it's said you can hear screams echoing throughout, day or night. These screams are thought to belong to Anne Naylor, the station's resident ghost. As the story goes, Anne was a 15-year-old hatmaker's apprentice who was killed by her boss and the boss's daughter in 1758. Her killers initially hid her body in the family attic, but when the stench became unbearable, disposed of the remains in a sewer close to what is now Farringdon Station. Fortunately, the mother-daughter pair that covered up her death were later caught for their crime. But that doesn't stop the piercing screams that allegedly ring throughout the station, giving Anne the nickname, the Screaming Spectre. Number 3. The British Museum Station. Closed as a station in 1933, the British Museum Station later became an air raid shelter during World War II and is now used for storage. But even before closing, stories began circulating that the station was haunted by the ghost of an ancient Egyptian mummy from the British Museum. Dressed in a loincloth and headdress, the mummy reportedly walks around the tunnels at night, screaming in their native language. Rumors got so big that a newspaper allegedly offered a monetary reward to anyone willing to spend the night in the station, but nobody would. In 1935, a film called Bulldog Jack was released. This crime thriller introduced the idea of a secret tunnel from the British Museum Station to the Egyptian room of the museum. Although this tunnel is, as far as the public knows, not real, legend has it that 2 women disappeared from nearby Holborn Station, where screams have also been reported, on the night the film was released. The next morning, claw marks were found on the walls of the British Museum Station. Number 4. Highgate Station. Highgate Station was opened in 1867. In 1935, there was a plan to remodel and reconstruct, but World War II got in the way, and the project was never finished. Today, the abandoned construction still stands, and the station is no longer used for transporting passengers. If this sounds like an uneventful history for a supposedly haunted station, that's because it is. There are no reported deaths or other tragedies in the area, nothing that would explain paranormal activity. Despite this, locals still report train sounds coming from the area of the abandoned construction. Are these sounds coming from nearby trains and only being mistaken as coming from Highgate? Or has years of abandonment done something strange to this station? Number 5. Bank Station. Bank Station, like many, is no stranger to tragedy. In January 1941, when the UK was in the middle of World War II, a bomb ripped through the station, killing 111 people. Ever since, visitors have reported hearing moans and screams when the station is quiet. But the station's most popular ghost is Sarah Whitehead. Her older brother, Philip, who worked at the nearby Bank of England, was arrested for fraud in 1812 and promptly executed. Once Sarah noticed she hadn't seen her brother in a while, she started dressing all in black and visiting the bank, asking for him. This later earned her the nickname, the Black Nun. For some reason, Philip's former co-workers didn't tell her the truth right away, possibly because they were afraid she couldn't handle it. Apparently they were right, because even after receiving the news, she continued to show up day after day asking for Philip. Eventually, she was forbidden to come on the bank property again, even given a bribe to convince her. Maybe this is why her ghost wanders the nearby station instead of the actual bank, still asking passengers if they've seen her brother. Visitors have reported unusual smells, as well as overwhelming feelings of sadness.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. So before we get into this, I just want to let you know There are people in the house next door chopping down trees, and there's construction going on 2 lots down, where they're building not 1 but 2 houses. So it's been pretty noisy around here for the past week or so. It shouldn't be too much of an issue. Most of the outside sound isn't picked up on this camera, but just in case there's something going on that I can't edit out later, that's what it is. I'm so sorry. So Ireland has a pretty rich history dating back thousands of years, and with a history that long often comes hauntings. Ireland is full of them, but today we're looking at one that's not quite as well known as, say, some of its castles. But it has also been called one of the most haunted houses in Northern Ireland. Let's talk about Cumber House. Cumber House is located in Claudy, a village in the county of Derry, also known as Londonderry, in Northern Ireland, aka the part of Ireland that is part of the United Kingdom. In 2011, the population of Claudy was 1,340, so it's extremely small. The stereotype about small towns is that they're usually quiet and not a lot goes on there. As someone who has lived in small towns most of my life, I can say that that stereotype is usually true. And that does largely seem to be the case for Claudy, though the county of Derry itself has quite the reputation. Derry has been called the world's best Halloween destination and boasts a pretty large number of allegedly haunted places. Among these places are a road, a hotel, and an old convent. In a smaller townland called Derryork, farmers have reported their crops being destroyed by fairies. That's right, Tinkerbell is coming to destroy your crops. There's not a lot of easily accessible information on Cumber House. From what I could tell, it was built in the 1830s, and there's a cemetery on the ground, which might explain some of the paranormal activity. So here's the story behind the haunting. At one point, the house belonged to the Brown family. The patriarch of the family is never named in these stories, and actually, neither is anyone else. So I'll call him Mr. Brown for the remainder of this video just for the sake of clarity. Mr. Brown was not very well liked by the people in town, and often took advantage of his position of wealth and power. After he died, a priest told the family's gardener that Mr. Brown was burning in hell. The Brown's son, who I guess I'll call Brown Jr., heard about this via the gardener and was so angry, he confronted the priest and held him up at gunpoint, screaming at him to prove his father was in hell. Obviously, this is a bit difficult to do. The priest began praying on his knees. At first, nothing seemed to happen, and the son grew agitated. I'm not sure why he didn't just kill him right there. He must have been very patient. Finally, the priest drew a circle on the floor, and Mr. Brown's ghost appeared engulfed in flames, seemingly confirming the rumor that he was in hell. The priest managed to escape the clutches of Brown Jr. and never returned to the house. Mr. Brown continued to haunt the house for a while until his spirit was banished by another priest. Strangely, his spirit was banished into a tree on the property. I assume because that's the first thing the priest could find in the moment. Today, visitors report hearing knocking and scraping sounds from inside the tree. Other rumors include a woman on the front steps, lights going on and off, gusts of wind, objects moving on their own, and appliances turning on and off by themselves. I couldn't find many specific stories of hauntings at Cumber House on things like social media or forums, but there have been a decent number of paranormal investigations in the house. One group that's held at least 2 of these investigations is called Supernatural Activities. Their website details an investigation they held on the 11th and 12th of July in 2015. According to their website, Supernatural Activities is an exceptional company that uniquely blends corporate eventing with a highly skilled and professional psychic medium dedicated in providing a variety of paranormal, mystical and mythical tours, events, and activities. This investigation was comprised of both laymen and those who professed to be psychic mediums, as well as some skeptics and people who had never experienced the paranormal. There was a seance held at the house, and according to Supernatural Activity's website, some of the group members during that seance made contact with their dead loved ones. They also claimed to be visited by someone named Thomas Leckie, who said he was a distant relative, I assume of the Brown family, and that he'd visited Cumber House before. Another seance visitor was Colonel Francis Brown, who told them all about the medals he'd earned while serving in India. Other ghosts that reportedly made contact that night were a 13-year-old girl and a little boy named Joe. Cumber House is the only place listed on their website that goes into details about an investigation there. That one in 2015 is the only one listed, but I did find other information about another investigation by the same group in July of 2017. In an article that month in the Belfast Telegraph, Fiona Stewart Williams, who works with Supernatural Activities, said she'd been in the house multiple times and considered it one of the most haunted houses in Northern Ireland. In the article, another woman named Katie Carlisle, who also works with Supernatural Activities, detailed her paranormal experiences in the house. 2 years ago at Halloween, I was working for an event at Cumber House on my own, late in the evening. I was making my way up from the basement and reached the foot of the stairs near the very famous tower room, and from the room behind me, I heard a loud noise. Of course, I had to go and look, and the Hoover had just gone on. There was no one in the room with me, and I had been in the house for several hours on my own, so that was a bit strange. Another time, when I was with several other people, a large gym ball started rolling by itself, even though there wasn't a breeze or any wind. So a vacuum cleaner coming on by itself and a gym ball moving on its own. Maybe the Cumber House ghosts like to clean and work out. If so, I would love it if they could come to my house and vacuum, because I really hate vacuuming. There have been a few other investigations by different groups. One of the most prominent that seem to have the most investigations or footage there is called Life After Life TV Productions. They have an entire playlist of their investigations on their YouTube channel, and some of them are close to 3 hours long. I will leave a link to that playlist below if you want to check it out for yourself. By the way, in one of their investigation videos, I heard in the background what sounded like stomping around. I'm not sure if it was something supernatural or if it was just other people in the house. Today, Cumber House is owned by the Derry City Council, and you can rent it out for events. If you've ever been to Cumber House or any other haunted places in or around Derry, I would love to know about them in the comments. Unfortunately, the closest I've ever been to Ireland is flying over it in 2015 on my way to London, but the greenery was beautiful. So for most of my life, I've had this bizarre fear of trains. I mean, I guess it's not that bizarre. We are talking about machines that could literally rip you apart in seconds, but it's not a fear I see a lot of people talking about. A few months ago, I got a request to cover the haunted train tracks of San Antonio. When I looked into the legend, I realized I'd already heard it before, and it reminded me why I was ever afraid of trains in the first place. It's a pretty popular legend, so you may have heard of it too, but whether you are visiting or revisiting it, I hope you enjoy hearing about it as much as I enjoyed researching it. The section of the railroad thought to be haunted lies on the intersection of Shane and Villamane roads in San Antonio, Texas. San Antonio residents, as well as others, have been visiting the tracks for years, hoping to catch a glimpse of some very specific paranormal activity. As with most of these ghost stories, there are a couple of different versions, but they're both so detailed and different that I'm just going to share them both. Both stories take place in an unspecified year in the 1930s or 1940s. In the first story, a busload full of children is on its after-school route taking the children home. But the bus stalls on the now famous train tracks, and there's a train coming fast. The driver attempts to get the students off the bus and does manage to save a few, but when the train hits, 10 of the students and the driver are all killed. Okay, that story wasn't very detailed, but this next one is. In the next story, it's nighttime and the kids are returning to school after a field trip. The bus is being driven by a nun, which I never actually envisioned happening, but I guess is possible. No word on whether the school is a Catholic school. When the bus stalls and the train hits, all of the students are killed, but the nun somehow survives. A few weeks later, the nun goes back to the train tracks and decides to kill herself out of guilt. She parks her car on the tracks and waits for a train to come. But as one finally starts coming, she hears voices and her car starts moving forward, seemingly on its own. The car rolls to safety and the nun survives without a scratch. When she examines the back bumper, she sees tiny, child-sized handprints in the dust. The nun later opens up a school for orphans and runs it until she dies, making up for the lives she felt responsible for taking by helping others out in need. Moral of the story? Don't stress if you can't make it to the car wash for a few weeks. Whatever the actual story, rumors of hauntings have persisted ever since. Locals have claimed to hear train noises like whistles and wheels screeching when there are no trains scheduled to pass through, as well as children's laughter. Others who live in the neighborhood of the train tracks have claimed to see decapitated chickens in the area and have heard rumors of witchcraft. Another legend associated with this story bears more resemblance to the famous vanishing hitchhiker story that's been around for years. In this version, a woman was driving down Shane Road at night and saw a little girl on the side of the road. Thinking the girl was a runaway, the woman offered her a ride. The woman drove back to her house, but once they got there, the girl didn't want to get out of the car. The woman said she would talk to the girl's parents and turned around to go back inside. But when she turned back around to look into the car, the girl was gone. To add a bit more to the whole story and legend, some people point out a couple of different streets in the area, like Cindy Sue Way and Bobby Allen Way, intersecting roads that are both close to Shane Road and have names that sound very childlike. They say that these roads were named after children who died in this bus crash. It is worth noting, though, that there are several intersecting roads in this area that have female-sounding names, like Nancy Carroll or Laura Lee. Nowadays, the tracks attract paranormal enthusiasts both in and out of San Antonio. Ghost hunters will visit the tracks, park their cars 20 to 30 feet away, sprinkle baby powder on the back of the cars, put the car in neutral, and wait. The car will then roll off the tracks, again seemingly on its own, and when the driver or one of their companions inspect the back bumper, they see child-sized fingerprints or handprints in the baby powder. It's as if the child ghosts are pushing them to safety. However, I assume these visitors don't perform the experiment when a train is actually coming, because that would be extremely dangerous. Now, I hate to be a killjoy. Who am I kidding? I love to be a killjoy. But there are a few holes in this urban legend. For starters, no bus crash of this sort has ever happened anywhere near San Antonio. I did a little bit of digging, and by digging I mean scrolling through Wikipedia, which is the most reliable source on the internet, right? I could only find 2 school bus crashes in the 1930s or 40s that involved collisions with trains. The first one happened in Rockville, Maryland on the night of April 11th, 1935. High school students from Williamsport, about an hour away, were returning home late at night after a chemistry fair when their bus collided with a train. I'm not sure why the driver stopped on the tracks at that particular moment. Maybe he didn't see the train coming, or maybe he thought he could beat it. Nevertheless, 14 of the 27 students on board died in what is still considered one of the worst school bus tragedies in Maryland history. The bus driver was charged with manslaughter, but a grand jury didn't indict him. His license was revoked due to previous driving violations, as well as failing to stop on the tracks. But the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad was also held partially responsible because they were supposed to have a watchman on guard as well as a safety gate. The crash also inspired political action, with President Roosevelt pledging to spend $200 million to fix dangerous railroads across the country. And if he said he would give money to make railroads safer, he definitely did it, because no politician has ever promised something and then not followed through. Right? The next crash happened in Salt Lake City, Utah on December 1st, 1938. This one is brought up quite a bit by people discussing the San Antonio legend. And as we'll get to later, a lot of people think this is actually the crash that inspired that legend. It was Salt Lake City's first snowstorm of the year, and the kids were being bused to school around 8:30 that morning. But the driver didn't see the train coming because of thick fog, and 23 students, as well as the driver, were all killed. The crash prompted new safety regulations for buses and trains, including the railroad crossing arms that you still see at train tracks today. When I started looking into the San Antonio legend, I noticed a picture of a newspaper floating around on various blogs and articles. The newspaper article is from the San Antonio Express, and I guess people are using it to show that the San Antonio crash was real. But if you look closely at the print, it's clear this newspaper is talking about the crash in Salt Lake City. I assume it made the front page of a newspaper in San Antonio because it was big enough to make national news, but I don't know for sure. The rest of the legend has been pretty thoroughly debunked as well. A man named Matt DeWelsh, an archivist at the San Antonio Public Library, was credited with this debunking back in 2003. He discovered the Salt Lake City crash and assumed this was the one that inspired the San Antonio legend, though it's not clear how the story took root in a city over 1,000 miles away. He also noted that the fingerprints that became visible after the car was sprinkled with baby powder were prints that were already on the car and were just made visible by the powder. I will admit to being ignorant on the science behind this. On the flip side, I did read a story from a San Antonio woman who claimed she saw child-sized handprints on her car after visiting the tracks, but no children had been in or around her car for a while. Matt DeWelsh isn't the only person who has questioned the legend. There's a video right here on YouTube that shows paranormal investigators visiting the tracks. The hill going up to the tracks looks like it goes uphill, so a car couldn't make it up there on its own. But this is an optical illusion, and the road actually goes downhill. The video shows the road from different angles, and it actually does seem to go downhill. I'll link that video below if you're interested. Even though this legend is probably not true, it has inspired at least one movie. Fingerprints was released back in 2006 and follows a Texas woman named Melanie who moves back in with her parents after leaving rehab. Shortly after her arrival, a string of murders begins, and Melanie sees a ghost girl, somehow entangling her in the mystery of the haunted train tracks. I remember seeing this movie years ago. I mainly watched it because Melanie's sister was played by Kristen Cavallari, and I was a huge Laguna Beach fan. I honestly couldn't even tell you if I liked the movie or not, though general consensus is that it's not that great. In 2016, construction in the area temporarily closed the tracks. In 2018, Union Pacific planned to build new railroads in the area. The planned construction would change the elevation of the tracks so that the legend would no longer work. I assume the road leading up to the tracks would no longer appear to go uphill, but it wasn't really clear from the information I could find. And this was supposed to happen almost a year ago, so I'm not sure what the tracks or the area look like now. At this point, it's clear that the legend is probably not true. But if there really are ghosts at the San Antonio tracks, I doubt a little bit of construction would scare them away. So what do you think of this story of the haunted railroad tracks of San Antonio? Have you ever been there? If you're from San Antonio or have ever lived there or spent a lot of time there, what version of the story did you hear? I'm always interested to hear about these legends from the locals' perspectives. On January 23rd, 1897, a 23-year-old woman in Meadow Bluff, West Virginia, was found dead in her home. Although she died young and suddenly, This death was relatively normal as far as deaths go, until the supernatural came into play. This case has been called the only one where testimony from a ghost resulted in a conviction. Let's talk about the case of Zona Heaster Shue, better known as the Greenbrier Ghost. Not much is known about Zona's early life. She was born in 1876 in Meadow Bluff, and some sources say she gave birth to an illegitimate child around 1895. In 1896, Zona met a blacksmith named Edward Stribling Shue, who went by the name Trout. The couple fell head over heels for each other and married in November of that year. But they would only be married for a few months when tragedy struck. Around 11 a.m. on January 23rd, Edward Shue sent for an 11-year-old boy named Andy Jones. Andy regularly did errands and chores for Zona, and Shue asked if Andy would collect some eggs from their farmhouse and asked Zona if she needed anything. But when Andy reached the couple's farmhouse, nobody answered the door. When he stepped inside, he found Zona dead, along with a trail of blood leading from her body to the front porch. After making this discovery, Andy ran back home and told his mom about what had happened. Then he went to the blacksmith shop and told Shue. Shue was seemingly very upset over the death of his wife and ran straight home. Zona's death was ruled to be the result of a heart attack, though some sources would say everlasting faint. Interestingly, the coroner reportedly later changed her cause of death to complications from childbirth. This is kind of odd since there doesn't seem to be any solid evidence that Zona was pregnant. By the time the coroner arrived at the Shue home, Zona had already been dressed in a high-necked gown with a scarf around her neck, presumably by her husband. Shue also helped prepare her body, always making sure he was the one who handled her head. At her wake, he always stood at the head of the casket. He'd also put a folded sheet by one side of her head and some clothes on the other side, saying it would help her rest easier. A scarf had been tied around her neck, her favorite one, according to him. Zona was buried in the Soul Chapel Methodist Cemetery in Greenbrier County. Even though rumors and speculation flew around town that foul play was involved in her death, it was determined to be nothing more than a tragic, natural death. Then, a few weeks later, Zona's mother, Mary Hester, came forward with a very interesting story. According to Hester, Zona's ghost had appeared to her 4 nights in a row. She reportedly appeared to Hester while she was praying and vanished when Hester tried to touch her. And she gave her mom some pretty damning information about her husband. Zona's ghost apparently told her mom that Edward Shue had attacked her in a fit of rage while they were arguing about a meal she had prepared for him. She said Shue squeezed her neck hard, breaking it between the first and second vertebrae. Zona's head apparently even turned 180 degrees when she said this. In retelling her story, Hester would also give details about the couple's house and other buildings in the area, none of which she'd ever visited herself. Hester went to the local prosecutor and asked him to investigate Zona's death. He was reluctant at first, but eventually agreed. And the investigation revealed some very interesting information about Edward Shue. For starters, his name wasn't actually Edward, but Erasmus Trout Shue. He'd been married twice before, and his other wives had also died under strange circumstances. One of them had even died of a broken neck. He'd also spent time in prison for stealing a horse. Zona's body was exhumed for examination. Upon this re-examination, it was found that her neck had been broken between the first and second vertebrae, just where Mary Hester said it would be. All of her other body parts and organs appeared fine and normal. Edward Shue was arrested and charged with murder. Before his wife's body had been exhumed, he'd said he knew he would be arrested, but that nobody would ever be able to prove he had killed her. Shue went on trial in mid-June of 1897. Almost all of the evidence against him was circumstantial. Mary Heaster testified at the trial about her alleged ghostly visits from Zona. The defense claimed these ghost sightings were just dreams. Since they were actually the ones who called Heaster to the stand, it's been speculated that they did this to discredit her. But if that was their plan, it didn't work. On June 22, 1897, Shue was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison. He died there of the flu in 1900. So, what happened here? Did a mother really get visits from her daughter's ghost? Or is there a more logical explanation? Let's go over some of the less supernatural theories here. The first theory is that the defense was correct, and Mary Heaster really just did have a very vivid dream. I don't know about you guys, but I've had plenty of dreams that felt completely real in the moment. Occasionally, my dreams felt so real that I didn't even realize they were dreams until after I woke up. Did Heaster just dream up these visits and think they were real? Or did she maybe just want to believe they were real? The next theory is that Heaster really did see Zona's ghost, or at least thought she did, but was coached by prosecutors to make her story more interesting. Maybe she actually saw something a little more ambiguous, a slammed door, a falling object, something that people could attribute to the supernatural, but also could just be from something ordinary, like a draft. Then her story was punched up to make it more appealing. The last theory is that Heaster never saw Zona's ghost, knew she'd never seen it, and made the whole thing up. But why might she do something like this? She reportedly hadn't liked her new son-in-law from the start, and very well might have had suspicions about his involvement in Zona's death that she couldn't prove. Did Heaster have a gut feeling that Shue killed her daughter and invented a ghost story to get more attention on the case? Even today, many cases are progressed or even solved due to extra attention on them, since that attention often leads law enforcement to investigate further. After Zona died, her death was reported in the Greenbrier Independent. In that same issue, a story ran about a man in Australia who was killed and thrown into a pond. Several people in his town reported seeing the man's ghost by the pond. Years later, a man made a deathbed confession. He made the whole thing up. After witnessing this murder, he was afraid to come forward with what he knew because he thought the killer might come after him next. So he fabricated the ghost sightings and spread the rumors in order to get more attention on the case so that it might one day be solved. Did Mary Heaster see this article and get an idea from it? There are a couple of other bits of speculation in this case. There was a rumor that the people of Meadow Bluffs thought Heaster had broken Zona's neck in her coffin in order to frame Shue for murder. Another rumor suggested that Zona was pregnant and Shue attacked her because he thought she'd been unfaithful and that the baby might not be his. So what happened with Zona's Shue? Did jurors really convict her killer based on the testimony of her ghost? Did they instead vote guilty based on other evidence? Did Mary Heaster really see her daughter's ghost? Did she think she saw it and convinced herself that her daughter was still with her in some way? Or did she invent the story entirely to get attention on the man she thought was responsible? As always, I will let you decide for yourself what you believe. Thanks for watching and have a creepy day.
I love traveling, but the word tourist has a bad reputation. We all know the stereotype of the middle-aged couples in oversized t-shirts and fanny packs, fawning over ordinary-looking landmarks, simply because someone famous lived there or made a speech there. But there are plenty of tourist attractions with a darker history they don't tell you about in guidebooks. Here are 4 famous places you probably didn't realize are haunted. Number 1. The White House. It's been the home of every U.S. president since John Adams,
who moved in with his wife, Abigail, way back in 1800. As one of the oldest and most notable of America's tourist attractions, it's no surprise, then, that the White House has its share of ghost stories. Former presidents Thomas Jefferson and Andrew Jackson have been seen in their spirit form, as well as the First Lady to live there, Abigail Adams herself. But the hauntings aren't limited to well-known figures. Another oft-reported ghost is a woman named Annie Surratt, or Anna, depending on the source. Surratt's mother, Mary, was executed for playing a role in President Abraham Lincoln's assassination. Annie has reportedly been spotted pleading for her mother's release. Other sightings include a demon cat and a teenage boy known only as the Thing. But the most frequently reported ghost is also one of the most famous, our 16th president, Abraham Lincoln himself. Multiple First Ladies, as well as a seamstress, and even Winston Churchill, all claim to have either seen Lincoln's ghost or felt his presence. In life, Lincoln's wife, Mary Todd, held seances in the house's Red Room after the death of their son Willie in 1862. At one point, Mrs. Lincoln even reported seeing her son's ghost at the foot of her bed. President Lincoln was said to have told his wife about a premonition he had of his own death 3 days before he was assassinated. Could her seances have opened up a portal into the spirit world? According to researcher Jared Broach, Lincoln's ghost reappears when the country is in great need or peril. With all the contention still surrounding the 2016 presidential election, could Lincoln be due to make his next appearance sooner rather than later? Number 2. The Golden Gate Bridge. Built in 1937, the San Francisco Bridge is among the most famous in the world, boasting over 10 million visitors a year. The surrounding area, complete with boat tours, campgrounds, and wildlife events, is clearly appealing to tourists. Unfortunately, the Golden Gate Bridge has a darker side to its history. The bridge is one of the most popular sites in the world for suicides. It's estimated that anywhere from 1,600 to 2,200 people have jumped to their deaths from the bridge. In June of 1995, with the official toll creeping close to 1,000, the California Highway Patrol stopped keeping track, fearing the publicity would only encourage would-be jumpers. Sadly, 2 months later, the bridge claimed its 1,000th victim. But suicide victims aren't the only ones whose lives have been lost on the bridge. In February 1937, 10 construction workers fell to their deaths while building the bridge. An estimated 300 ships lay in the waters beneath it. The death toll from these wrecks is unknown. Unsurprisingly, many spirits have been reported on the bridge. Although it's closed to foot traffic after dark, many witnesses have spotted ghosts walking along the sidewalk at night. Disembodied screams and ghost ships that pass right through solid objects on foggy nights have also been reported. Number 3. The Hollywood Sign. Built in 1923 as part of an ad campaign for a housing development, the Hollywood sign now symbolizes the glamour of the entertainment industry. But, much like Hollywood itself, the sign has a darker history than you think. In 1863, the park was a ranch belonging to a wealthy bachelor named Don Antonio Feliz. When Feliz died and left his housekeeper nothing in his will, the housekeeper allegedly cursed the property. Several bouts of misfortune followed, including the premature death of the ranch's new owner, as well as a lightning storm and cattle deaths. In 1976, a couple was crushed to death by a falling tree branch while making love on a picnic table. Yes, you heard that right. Today, moans are often reported in the area, as well as shaking tree branches. Is the area actually cursed, or perhaps merely haunted by the spirits of the dearly departed lovers? But the most famous ghost in the area is that of Peg Entwistle. Many people move to Hollywood in hopes of stardom. Most don't make it, but few create the same impact as Entwistle. On September 16, 1932, after a string of bad luck looking for work, Entwistle jumped to her death from the H in the sign. Ironically, she would receive a letter the very next day offering her a leading role in a film. Entwistle has reportedly haunted the area around the sign since the 1940s. Park rangers as well as hikers have seen a woman in 1930s clothing wandering in the mountains, and some even say they've witnessed her making her infamous jump. Rangers claim she appears on foggy nights, and her appearance is often accompanied by the smell of gardenias, even in the winter when no flowers bloom. Number 4. Disney World. It's the happiest place on earth, or is it? Rumors of hauntings plague all three of the park's major locations in Orlando, Anaheim, and Paris. Since the original Anaheim Park opened in 1955, dozens of deaths have occurred on the grounds. While many have been confirmed as fact, ghost stories associated with the park often seem to spring from urban legends. One of the most popular ghosts is George, a former construction worker at the park who reportedly fell to his death from a high area of the Pirates of the Caribbean ride. It's said that park workers say good morning and good night to him every day. If he's not given the respect he feels he deserves, he's known to do things like appear in monitors and even shut the ride down. Others report seeing the ghost of a little boy in the Haunted Mansion attraction. As the story goes, the boy died and he loved the ride so much that his family scattered his ashes there. Now people report seeing a young boy running around the attraction or standing next to the exit, crying. This story, however, is dubious. Although it's possible the boy's ashes were secretly dumped, Disney employees highly discourage this, as the ashes will just end up in the trash. So I doubt this boy's spirit is still hanging around if his ashes aren't. Other stories include a little girl wandering around Epcot, though this is probably a common occurrence at a theme park, and a ghost man at the Tower of Terror. Among Disney's many locations, and with so much dark history, there probably won't be a shortage of ghosts anytime soon. So what are your favorite haunted tourist attractions? Let me know in the comments below. Like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and have a creepy day.